Hello, everybody, and welcome to Azure Community Live. We have been off the air, or what do you want to call it, for quite a while. A lot of stuff happened in the last 6 months, I guess, but we're back with a first event here with Orin Thomas. Welcome, Orin.
G'day, Lars.
This is what is now, I think these are called Ignite Watch Party. So however you want to skew that, but I know I could wear my special hat. Anyway, what the idea is that we talk to Orin, or me and Orin and I. Feel free to put anything in the comments that you want to ask Orin as well. And then we watch Orin's sessions from Ignite, which is on a Windows hybrid for beginners, hybrid computing, I think it's called, hybrid server. Yeah, I'm probably messing that up. Yeah, Orin's giving me the look. And then afterwards, you ask questions about that session and what you thought, and other questions, because Orin will be here as well afterwards. So that's the idea. I should just first say that Azure Community Live is for the community, because we do. It's funny, we started these meetups online in December 2019. So just before everybody else went online. So that kind of took the fizz a bit out of it. But hopefully when everybody goes back to live events as well for meetups, there'll still be a large proportion of people that can't attend meetups regularly, because like me, you might live in the middle of nowhere. So that's what these events are for. So just get that in there. But what do you reckon, Orin? Well, is there something you want to share about your session before we started, I guess?
Look, the idea of the session is Windows Server Hybrid for beginners. So it's very much aimed at an IT pro audience who might have a Windows Server background and is really looking for a refresher, or basically a first look at all of the areas, or at least a select group of areas where you can extend the Windows Server operating system into the cloud using a variety of hybrid technologies. And as it says in the talk, this is sort of tangentially related to a brand new certification that Microsoft just announced, which will be going live early in 2022. That's the Windows Server Hybrid Administrator Associate certification. And this is sort of the next generation of Windows Server certification. So certification actually in IT at Microsoft goes right back to Windows NT 3.51. And that was the MCC in Windows NT. And this would trace its lineage in some ways back to that original certification from the very early 1990s.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, because I spoke to you earlier. I mean, I do a weekly show for ACG plug. It's right there. I mean, there, where we talked about the certification as well. I figure they would probably play into this as well, being hybrid and everything. So that kind of makes sense. So okay, well that's good. So yeah, if there's anyone out there, hello on the internets, please feel free to ask questions about AZ800 and 801, the hybrid certs as well for Azure, because I think that's kind of related to what we're going to watch. So now, just before we started, I was thinking, because you did 3 sessions at Ignite, is that right? I think
no, just
2 sessions. Two sessions. Okay.
I did a Learn Live and I did this half-an-hour session on Windows Server Hybrid.
Did you get a chance at all? Because I know how it is when you're in the event. Did you get a chance to watch any other sessions at all?
I watched Jeffrey Snover's one with Jason Helmick on PowerShell, and Snover, who is absolutely wonderful and a good mate, absolutely brings the rain when it comes to delivering a session. So he and Jason basically do an unplugged version of PowerShell. And if you don't know, PowerShell is Jeffrey's baby, and is now a cross-platform thing. It's used you can use it across clouds, and very much an administrative language. Yeah. And so the two of them were talking about sort of how things have been extended and how PowerShell is really going forward. So there's a really great tech talk that those two did. And there's a couple of others. There's the one, and I can't remember exactly who gave
TikTok?
it. No, Tech Talk.
Oh, TikTok.
Yeah, where a couple of people, and you might have seen the images of them, were writing on sort of this glass whiteboard, and you could see them sort of diagramming everything out. And it's actually very clever how, of course, when you're seeing them diagram on the glass, they're writing in a way that you can understand it and it's not reversed. And I sort of sat there and I went, how on earth is that working? Because it's like this, they're writing on the screen in front of you, but they're
that's
writing.
right.
So what they do with that is that they record the whole session and in post-production, they flip it. And then that way it appears like, because they're not wearing any logos or anything on their clothes, you can't tell that they've been flipped, but they've been completely flipped. So it looks like they're drawing backwards if you think about it, because you're just thinking like your brain doesn't click and think, oh, I shouldn't be seeing those letters look like that because that person's on the other side of the glass writing those letters. So unless that person knows how to write backwards, that's very good. And I sort of sat there and I'm watching all of these diagrams. I go, these people are either exceptionally talented in something that I've never seen anybody ever do before in a live tech session, or there's some trick. So I asked my boss, Rick, about it, and he said, no. What we do is we make sure there's no logos on them. We record the session, and then once it's recorded, we just flip it. And that way it goes from being exactly what you'd expect when we record it, which is all of the writings backwards, to all of the writings the right way around. And no one can tell because no one actually picks up that these people have been flipped.
I thought there would be some sort of magic. I didn't see the session, but I thought about doing something like that, like writing on the screen or somewhere to explain a concept or something. And I was thinking, okay, how do I then mirror it? So
there is definitely a technology that's done that. And I think it's even built into Teams where you can actually write on a pad and it'll actually sort of draw what you're writing on the screen for you so that you can do an overlay of your normal writing where you're writing it down there and then it'll actually do it and overlay it on Teams for you. But this was literally one of those, I'm standing in front of a thing of glass and I'm just writing on the glass and you're sitting there going, and you don't even think about it. And then you think, wait a sec, that should be backwards.
Yeah.
What's going on here? Yeah, no, and 99% of people won't pick that up. But for the people who do pick it up and are watching that session, it would be driving them bananas.
I would do that. It would drive me mad because I'd be sitting here thinking, how is that done?
Yes, especially how can they write and how can they diagram stuff out with little writing and stuff like that and be drawing it so fast and doing it backwards,
backwards with the left hand.
Yeah, okay. Maybe it is really difficult to interview at Microsoft because that's one of the tests that they give you, write backwards while doing a presentation on a topic of your choice. For example, how do you do cloud software updates?
Live in front of 2,000 people.
Yes, exactly.
I'm just going to pull up the Ignite thing for your talk so I can introduce it properly because I forgot to do that. I apologize. And if I could type now, no, that worked. How good is my camera? I'm on Starlink. It's working remarkably well.
Yes, you look like you're in outer space.
I'm traveling at 7.5 kilometers per second. Okay, session catalog. Talk amongst yourselves. So there are 3 coming up. That's why I thought it was 3, because it's helping customers achieve more in the cloud with AMD-powered VMs in Azure. Apparently, you come up in that as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this session, which is Windows Server Hybrid for Beginners, says file servers, network infrastructure, software updates, security, identity backup, and disaster recovery. So it's everything, it sounds like. Managing and maintaining this Windows Server functionality roles, that's a weird way of saying that. Anyway, has been a core IT pro task since the days of Windows NT 3.51. In this session, you'll learn about the basics of administering these core Windows Server roles and how you can use Azure Hybrid technologies to enhance what you can accomplish with them by integrating them with the cloud. Okay, well, that's sort of self-explanatory, I think.
I hope so.
Yeah, but yeah, we can just dive into the session, which is half an hour from memory, and 29 minutes and 51 seconds. And then we will return after that. And if you've got questions, ask them. Otherwise, it's all me. Exactly. So I'm going to see if I can do this. So I'm going to share that video. I'm going to share a video file. And there it is. Alrighty.
G'day viewers, my name's Orin Thomas, and in this session I'm going to be going through Windows Server Hybrid for Beginners. If you want to find out all my details, just go to aka.ms/Orin. Okay, let's start with the big question. What is hybrid? It's a complicated question because there's not an easy answer. So the one I've come up with is it's a continuum. Marty, what's a continuum? Well, let's think about it this way. You can be all on-prem or you can be all in the cloud. And when I'm thinking about, or when you're thinking about hybrid, what you've got to realize is it's as much or as little cloud as is right for your, not mine, not theirs, not his, not hers, organization. So you figure out what is right for you. And this is how I want you to think about hybrid. Hybrid is what we are considering a steady state, in that when people have talked about cloud in the past, what they've done is they've said, oh, cloud hybrid's only a transitional state. At the moment, you're all on-prem, and then you're going to take this great journey across the ocean, and you're going to end up at the cloud. But the reality is that most organizations are going to have their on-premises resources for quite some time, maybe forever. But they're also going to have some resources in the cloud. And hybrid is about finding that place on that path where your organization is having its needs met. It's having its problems solved. So what I want to talk about just for a moment, and the thing that sort of forms the spine of this whole talk, is the newly announced Windows Server Hybrid Administrator Associate Certification. So this session is Introduction to Windows Server Hybrid, and what I'm going to be talking about is some Windows Server Hybrid technologies. But I'm also going to be making reference to how these technologies are relevant to certain parts of this newly announced certification and the 2 exams that make up this certification. So there's 2 exams, as I just said. This first exam, AZ 800, deals with all of your core Windows Server technologies and how they interact with a hybrid cloud. So we start with identity, we move into management, we move into managing virtual machines or compute. We talk about managing on-premises and hybrid networking infrastructure, and then we look at managing storage and file services. In the second exam, which builds on the first, we move from those core technologies through to more advanced things. And the things that we're dealing with in the advanced SKU is that we're looking at how you handle security in a hybrid environment, how you manage high availability in a hybrid environment, how you implement disaster recovery in a hybrid environment, how you migrate workloads if you do decide, well, I've got that on-prem thing right now, and what I want to do is I want to move that to the cloud. Well, how you migrate. And then importantly, how do you think about monitoring and troubleshooting your Windows Server hybrid environment? The thing to understand about these exams, and the question I often get is, okay, well, I'm a Windows Server on-prem person. How much cloud do I need to know? Is it all cloud? Is it all going to be just Azure? What you'll learn in this talk, when I'm talking about hybrid, is that this approach to thinking about hybrid is about taking what you've got and what you're using and how you extend that, how you improve that, how you enhance that, how you empower that by plugging in the appropriate cloud technologies. So Let's imagine that you don't know what Windows Server is. And I'm guessing that most people, given that this is a Microsoft event, actually have a fairly basic understanding of what's going on here. But for those of you who need a bit of remedial coverage, it's a general purpose server operating system used by some organizations for 25 plus years. It actually got started in the Windows NT 3 days, NT 3.51, which came out around 92 or 93, about the time that I actually started working professionally in IT, before Windows 95, before NT4, and certainly before Active Directory. Now, what a purpose server operating system does is it provides all of those meat and potatoes roles to your environment. Because some people sit there and think, well, isn't computing just about applications that are available in the browser? Isn't computing just about the stuff, the apps I run on my phone and whatever back-end services need to support them? Well, it turns out that the most common type of server in the world is a file server. Why? Because most organizations in the world aren't really IT companies. They're accountancies, for example, who need to do people's tax returns and they need to store their Excel spreadsheets in a central location. There's also the print server. Sometimes there's an intranet server, and that intranet server just has to host a bunch of web pages that help people do their jobs. And for the most part, most organizations don't even have anybody involved in information technology on staff. What they've got is that they've got a couple of servers. They use Windows Server because it hosts Active Directory, and they log on to that and they access their file shares, and maybe they access their intranet server. And as a general purpose operating system, it's got a DHCP server, and it's got a DNS server, and it's got a whole lot of other things. Now, of course, you can do that all with Linux. However, there's a unified approach to Windows Server, and certainly in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of people that came in and said, we just need something that we can go and put in, and it's easy to manage because it's got a very easy to understand interface. And Windows Server fits the bill, and that's why there are literally tens of millions of Microsoft customers all over the world that have Windows Server deployed. And as I said, provides identity storage, networking, application hosting, virtualization, and management roles. And there are organizations all over the world that are still hosting on-prem Exchange, SQL Server, SharePoint, and other common workloads. And as I said, the file server is the most common type of server in the world. Now, what about hybrid cloud? So understand it this way. Rather than a cloud-first approach, where you're starting a business and you think, where do I go? And do I go out and buy some servers, or do I spin them up in the cloud? Most organizations have an existing infrastructure. So on-premises servers or on-premises services can be extended into the cloud, but you can also take management tools that run in the cloud and use them to manage resources on-prem. So hybrid is bi-directional. It works that you can take stuff and push it into the cloud, and then you can do stuff from the cloud and push it back on-prem. Roles, applications, and services in a pure hybrid environment are located in the best place for your organization. And a great example of that is probably Exchange. If you went back 20 years ago, everybody was running Exchange on premises. But Exchange by its nature, because it deals with email, is something that is almost natively something that you want to have, certainly with internet connectivity. So that is why it's one of those things that when Exchange Online and Office 365 and M365 became available, a lot of organizations said, you know what? It does make sense for all of this to exist in the cloud, and probably less sense for our organization, unless we have very specific requirements around compliance, to keep them on-prem. So some of those things moved up to the cloud, whereas there's other things, and file services is a good example. If you're working in video production, or if you're dealing with very large files, you want to have those files very close to where you're working with them, very high bandwidth connection to where you're working with them. If you're moving a couple of gigabytes around the network, you want to be doing it over a very fast network, and that's very difficult to do if those files are sitting in the cloud, because we just don't have that level of internet speed between most people's on-prem workstations and cloud data centers. So let's talk about several aspects of hybrid technology. The first one I want to talk about is Windows Server Hybrid Administration. And when I'm talking about all of these beginning elements of Windows Server Hybrid, you'll see a reference down the bottom of the slide in red to the objective domain within the Hybrid Administrator Associate exam that actually links to the topic I'm covering. I'm not covering all of the exams. All I'm saying is that even from a beginner perspective, you can understand how these technologies fit into this Windows Server hybrid beginning story. So, hybrid administration. A good Windows Server hybrid administration idea is to have the same set of tools managing your on-premises and your cloud resources. And we've got Windows Admin Center, which has been shipping for the last few years as a good tool that you can use to do that. Windows Admin Center is a web-based console that you can use to manage your on-premises Windows Server resources, but also allows you to connect those on-premises resources to Azure. And several of the services that we're looking at in this talk actually are managed through Windows Admin Center. But if you've got Windows Server running in the cloud, you can also use an on-premises instance of Windows Admin Center to actually manage those servers that are running in an Azure data center. But it's not just from the ground up. Azure Arc is a technology that has been talked about many, many times at Ignite. And Azure Arc is a suite of technologies that allows you to use the cloud as your management plane, that you connect into the cloud and then you use the cloud to manage your on-premises endpoints or your endpoints in other people's clouds. So that rather than you sitting on-prem and saying, I'm going to be managing up, with Azure Arc, you're almost managing down. So in terms of hybrid administration, in terms of the basic hybrid administration, understand that you find the management system that works for your organizations. For some organizations, the top-down approach is going to be absolutely perfect. For other organizations, their deployment is going to be such where they're going to mostly do their administration of their cloud resources through their on-premises resources because their cloud is a back-end to on-prem. Windows Server Hybrid Identity. Identity is one of the most important parts of any hybrid story. Simply put, what you want to do is you want to have the same user account being able to use to access resources, be those resources running on premises or in the cloud. In fact, if you go back, and most of you won't be as old as some of us are, in the 1990s, we used to have on our networks that every resource that you accessed, you needed to have a separate set of identities for. I started IT support at the University of Melbourne, and I remember when I was walking around the corridors there, I would walk into people's offices and they would have post-it notes on the side of their monitor with their login and password for each separate university system that they needed to access. And each one of those had its own password policies, and each one of those you had a different username for. When we moved towards using Windows NT as our identity provider, suddenly all of those identities could be collapsed and you could use a single identity. So with hybrid identity, what you can do using a product called Azure Active Directory Connect is that you can take your on-premises identity and replicate it up to the cloud. If your organization has Microsoft 365 or Office 365, you're already doing that. You're signing into the cloud with the same identity that you use to sign into your local computer. So understand that Azure AD Connect can replicate on-premises Active Directory identities into Azure so that you're using a single identity. Whereas when we got started with the cloud, when you were logging in to a cloud resource, you needed a separate account to access all your cloud resources compared to all of your on-prem resources. Now, in terms of Windows Server, you might be thinking, okay, I want to run some Windows servers in the cloud. How do I connect them so that I can use the same identity to sign into those Windows servers in the cloud that I use on-prem? And you use hybrid identity to solve that particular problem. Hybrid security is the idea that if you're going to think about security, you can't have separate stories for your on-premises resources and your cloud resources. That what you need to have is that you will need to approach the security of your resources from a hybrid perspective. That means that you've got to look at the security of all of your cloud resources and all of your on-premises resources. Because with security, it always comes down to this idea that the weakest link in the chain is the one that's going to break. And if you've got terrible cloud security, but great on-prem security, it's not going to matter because an attack is going to go after the weakest link. So with Azure Security Center, you can get visibility into the security configuration of your cloud resources, but you can also see the security configuration of your on-premises resources so that you can tell if your on-premises Windows Server instances are not configured as well as they could be in terms of security, that maybe they don't have anti-malware software installed, that maybe they don't have their disks, hard disks encrypted. The same applies to your resources in the cloud. So in a hybrid approach, you're using one tool to monitor or to assess the security configuration and raise alerts, which is the second part of this slide. We have a product called Azure Sentinel. Azure Sentinel is a SIEM. A SIEM is basically a big collector of security event information. So what you want to do is, traditionally, you would have a SIEM sitting on-prem, and it would connect to all of your security information from all of your servers and all of your network infrastructure and all put it in one place. Well, with Sentinel, you can go and put that in the cloud and then have all of that on-premises telemetry going up to the cloud, as well as ingesting all of the telemetry from all of your cloud resources in the same place. So that again, when you're analyzing, when you're searching through the security telemetry for your organization, you are seeing all of the continuum. You're seeing all of that spread from on-prem through to the cloud, and you're understanding your security in that particular manner. Microsoft Defender for Identity. So with your on-premises Windows Server instance, the thing that any attacker is going after is that they're going after Active Directory. Because if you can attack and successfully compromise Active Directory, you have control over identity. And if you've got control over identity, you've got control over everything. Now, what Microsoft Defender for Identity does is it uses the power of cloud analytics to look at all of the telemetry specific to Active Directory on-prem, and then to notify you of whether or not there's suspicious activity. because if someone's attacking your Active Directory, often they're not doing something very brute force, they're trying something subtle. And the cloud and the power of analytics that is available within the cloud allows you to really touch on and examine the problems with that telemetry, and then to tease out whether or not someone is actually attempting an attack. So what it does is it constantly updates its heuristics. And this is also important. If you think about how anti-malware software works, or it used to work in the past, it used to look for virus signatures. That is, it was trying to identify a file that was clearly infected by the binary characteristics of that file. Behavior-based security is looking for activity that indicates that it's problematic. And it might be, you know, a bit different. It's sort of like in Dune that you walk without rhythm so that you don't attract the worm. But behavior-based security allows you to even detect whether or not a set of footsteps on the sand are, you know, someone walking through the desert, or it's just the wind pushing on the sand. Sorry, that was a bit too nerdy for this reference, but you want to have the power to have your heuristics constantly updated so that as new and novel attacks develop, you're able to detect them as they're known about, rather than when you update your security product with the latest set of definitions. Windows Server hybrid file services, to me, are the most obvious early step into the cloud beyond, say, Office 365. Anybody who has managed a file server, and I did say that file servers were the most common form of workload, knows that you hit a problem fairly quickly. That is that people are always creating brand new files, but leaving the old ones in place. Why? Well, why would you remove them? Because you go and put the files on the file server. And there was a study done that found that if data hasn't been touched for 90 days, that if there's a file that's been put on a file server and it hasn't been opened for 90 days, there's a 95% chance that that file will never be opened again. However, no one is sitting there and counting when those 90 days have occurred. And one of my first jobs as a server administrator was going into a file share that was running out of space and trying to figure out what to remove. So what I'd do is I'd back up a whole lot of files that looked like they were in folders that were older folders to tape, and I'd go and put those tapes in a cupboard and then hope no one would ask about those files. Of course, someone would come back and say, hey, there was a file in this folder and I can't find it anymore. And then I would have to go and find the right tape and bring it back. What Windows Azure File Share does is it basically plugs into your existing file server infrastructure and turns on what's called storage tiering, which basically does is it looks at the age of a file, and if the file's older than a certain number of days, what it does is it puts a placeholder there like you get in OneDrive, and it keeps a copy of that, full copy of that file in the cloud, but it takes it away from that on-premises location. But for the purposes of whoever's looking at that file, when they're navigating, it looks like it's there. And if they try to open it, it replicates down from the cloud. But what it means is that your file server is continually being cleaned up and you don't have to do it manually. In terms of hybrid networking, in terms of how you connect your on-premises network to the cloud, the most obvious one is a virtual private network. You can set up a virtual private network so that you've got an encrypted connection between on-premises and the cloud. You can also use VPNs or a thing called ExpressRoute, which is a dedicated connection. And then if your organization is more and more integrated with Azure, instead of you configuring a wider area network with a hub and spoke topology where you're managing the hubs and spokes, you can basically treat every on-prem location as a spoke, and you can treat Azure as your hub through Azure Virtual WAN. Software updates is something else that you need to think about in terms of hybrid environments. So essentially, you need to make sure that all of your on-premises resources are updated. And you might have done that in the past using Windows Server Update Services or System Center Configuration Manager or another third-party product. But you also need to make sure that all of your resources in the cloud are being updated as well. Remember that wherever the weak link is, that's where the attack is going to go. So with Windows Azure Software Update Management, you can actually make sure that all of your on-prem and your cloud server instances are kept up to date. Backup and recovery is something also that works very well in hybrid environment. In the past, you used to back things up on-prem and you used to back them up to a tape drive. Then you would take the tape drive and take it off-site in case the building burnt down. That way that you could recover your infrastructure. What we've got with Azure Backup is we've got the ability to take your backup on-prem and then use your tape. Your tape library becomes all of that infinite storage that's sitting in the cloud. So it's a case of taking what you've got on-prem and then backing it up to the cloud. And similarly, you should make sure that all of your resources in the cloud are being properly backed up. Disaster recovery is probably the last thing I want to cover in this intro to Windows Server hybrid talk. Now, there are other elements of hybrid, but I wanted to cover these main aspects specifically and how they map through. And you can see this one maps to the AZ801 exam, the implement disaster recovery objective. The idea here is that in the past, you would have a disaster recovery site that might be located in a building on the other side of your city or in another state or whatever. And that periodically you would do a disaster recovery drill where you pretended that your primary site had had something terrible happen to it, like a meteor strike or too many snakes or too many spiders, and that everything would need to be moved to the disaster recovery site. What we've got now with things such as Azure Site Recovery is that we have the ability to replicate all of your on-premises workloads up to the cloud continuously, so that in the event that something fails on-prem, you can turn on those virtual machines in the cloud. That until you turn them on, they're just sitting there in storage as basically full replica, cold replicas of the virtual machines, but that you can use a single button to turn them up on and run your disaster recovery site in the cloud. The benefit of doing that is that you run it in the cloud until you get your primary site fixed, and then if you want, you fail back. It's not we're using this as a way to migrate to the cloud and you can't come back. What you're doing is you're using the cloud as a site should you need to fail over to the cloud and operate purely as cloud only because a flood has come through and wiped out your business on-prem. When all of that's fixed, you can bring the stuff back. Okay, so in this talk, I talked briefly about the Admin Associate certification. We talked about Windows Server. We talked about hybrid cloud. We talked about Windows Server administration, hybrid identity, hybrid security, Defender for identity, hybrid file services, hybrid networking, software updates, backup and recovery, and disaster recovery. Remember, what is hybrid? Well, it's a continuum. Now, I might have time for one or two questions, but otherwise, it's at Orin Thomas on Twitter, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you've got. Here's a set of resources. There's a Hybrids Getting Started guide. These slides will be available linked to the talk, and please fill out an evaluation. Are there any questions?
All right. So which Orin do we listen to?
Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Ignite.
I don't know if I got away with the salmon-coloured shirt, but blue shirt Orin is a little less Australian and a little more able to answer questions live right now.
That was very good. God, there was so much information in that. There was an awful lot of topics in half an hour. I guess first of all, because a lot of it was related back to the two exams, were all those topics on those two exams for the hybrid server?
Yeah. So
the way that was structured was, and the way that the certification is structured is that essentially the certification is 2 exams, starting with basic and then moving into advanced services. How all of those services work on-prem, and then how you extend them into the cloud. The idea being that traditionally people still need to know how to run Active Directory, how to run a file server, DNS, DHCP. They'll need to know how to do high availability. They'll need to know how to do virtualization. They'll need to know how to do monitoring, troubleshooting. But then how do you extend all of those into cloud environments? So if you've got a bunch of virtual machines running in Azure, and of course, one of the value props for people who are in the Microsoft ecosystem already is the idea of course, our cloud is the best place to run Windows Server workloads because we make Windows Server as well.
That's right.
Even though it'll run in other people's clouds completely fine, what we're doing is that there's a bit of extra synergy. It's a wonderful and terrible word, isn't it? There's synergies in running Windows Server in Azure. And sort of to a degree working out, okay, if you've got these workloads wherever they are, these Windows Server workloads, how do you actually think about how they connect into the cloud? Even if at the moment you just want to keep them on-prem. And the one I sort of mentioned in the talk was Azure File Sync, because Azure File Sync essentially gives you the endless file server. The problem being with on-prem file servers is they fill up fairly quickly with people writing data to them, whereas Azure File Sync just automatically sits there and goes, this file hasn't been touched for X days.
Yeah,
I'm just going to tier it up to the cloud, but I'm going to leave a placeholder there so that if anybody wants to access it, they double click on it and then it'll tier it back down from the cloud. But
that's how my OneDrive works, isn't it?
OneDrive allows you to selectively sync which files are there and which files are not. But what OneDrive doesn't do, unless there's something that's changed that I've missed, is that OneDrive doesn't sit there and go, oh, by the way, you haven't opened this file for 90 days.
No, it doesn't.
I'm going to automatically tier it to the cloud. And that's
once it's downloaded, download it.
Yeah. So with OneDrive, you decide on certain files the status, keep it local, keep it in the cloud. Whereas what Azure File Sync does is a bit more clever in that Azure File Sync will say, okay, I've set up a policy. The policy is if it's over 90 days and no one's touched it for the last 90 days, sync it to the tier it to the cloud, keep a placeholder there. Because there's been research that's shown that the likelihood of someone opening a file that hasn't been opened for 90 days is like 1 or 2%. It's almost never done.
Yeah.
That once a file sort of hasn't been opened for 90 days, it's probably never going to be opened again. But
it reminds me of it's that old thing of when you move house, if you haven't opened a box for 6 months after you moved in, you throw it out because you don't need it, right?
Yeah, no, and that I was actually going through my shed and finding stuff from the previous house from 10 years ago, but I was looking specifically for some stuff that had lost, and I didn't tell my dad that I'd lost the key to his great grandfather's shed, which he gave me when I turned 21, and I've been sitting there going, I think I lost this, and for the last 10 years, I thought it's either in the shed in one of those boxes from the other place, or it's not. But I hope it is because I don't throw anything out. Anyway, yesterday I found it. So I still got, my son just turned 19. I still had 2 years to go on the clock. So I'll put it somewhere safe. So I'm all good for when my son turns 21. And if my dad remembers that there is a key involved, I'm like, here you go, Dad. I kept it and it's in good nick. And this was your great grandfather's key. So it goes back to the 19th century. And it was just weird sort of a family tradition. And I found, again, I go through a box before I throw it out. And you always should do that because you will find stuff that you do want to keep, whether they be your infinite number of Microsoft certification certificates in my case, or sometimes my university transcripts or other things like that. It's surprising what's sitting there. And again, I was given an heirloom cabinet that had been my grandmother's. And I was going through that, and that had a bunch of documents in it that were my grandfather's university transcripts, Mechanics Institute where he joined the Masons and things like that. And
Oh,
again, that was fascinating for me, and I'm glad that that hadn't been thrown out. So if you can do tiering, you've never lost that thing, because the thing that any server administrator fears, and every server administrator's been through, is that you've gone, in the old days, what you used to do is you just muck out the file server, you'd throw it on tape, and you'd ship the tapes off-site to archive storage.
Yep.
And then you'd always get someone say, there was this file 5 years ago that was sitting on the file server that I can't find. It's like, really? Gosh, imagine that. Oh, we really need that. And it's sort of like,
now.
Okay, do we though? But currently we do. And often there's things like compliance about how long you've got to keep certain records and things like that. And so then you go and ping you used to go and ping your long-term storage. And there used to be all of these amazing, and they're probably still around, all of these places that were sort of sitting underground in salt mines and things like that, where all of these tapes are being stored that probably no one actually goes and recovers stuff from.
No,
but have to be kept there for compliance reasons. So now you just say, you know what, going to tier it to the cloud, keep it in cloud cold storage. And if someone wants it, well, they go and look on the file server and they go, oh, I can see the 2005 folder. It's right there. Double click.
Yeah, right.
Double click. Oh, there you go. Open
That was
right
the
up.
best answer, I think, to a question in a long time. We went all the way around and came back. That was fantastic. So because we're sort of already talking about exams, 800 and 801, so they come out in December in a beta and March or something in...
Yeah, something like that. So look, it's always a complicated process with the beta. So it depends on how the beta goes. So the beta should open up somewhere early mid-December. I don't know exactly when. It will be announced on the Learn blog. It'll certainly be trumpeted from the rooftops from my Twitter account and those of my colleagues.
Sure.
That beta period will probably be 4 to 6 weeks, not entirely sure. And then they do an analysis on the questions. And the whole idea of the analysis is to figure out if there's dodgy questions. And a dodgy question might be one where you get everybody that passes the exam seems to fail this question, which means either it's an obscure question that no one knows the answer to, or it's a badly constructed question that people are always getting the wrong answer to. So we pull apart the question and decide whether or not to take it down to the bottom paddock and or whether or not it can be resuscitated.
It's not a pet. Okay, so how do I study for this exams if it's not even out yet? Can I?
Okay, if you go to aka.ms/az-800 study guide, and it was actually on the last slide of the presentation. So if you go back to and then AZ801 study guide, or if you just do a Bing or the other one, search for AZ800 study guide. So there was actually study guide.
Can I edit it?
I don't know if you can.
I can put my user in timeout. No, I can't edit it. So hang on, let me just put it in again. So aks-ms/az800-study guide.
Yes.
One word?
Yes.
All right, let's do that. There we go.
And there's one, it's exactly the same. No, there's no, okay, so there's no dash between 800 and study guide. So we will get it on the third go.
All right, well, people figure that out.
Okay, so, or if you just Google AZ800 study guide, it'll come up with 2 blog posts on the IT Ops Talk blog that is actually a list of every exam objective, all of the Microsoft Learn modules that are associated with those objectives, and my own personal research into what the most relevant docs article is for those objectives. So if you want to go and read the primary source material, go and do that. You can go into docs and dive into docs and prepare that way. Of course, we know that our good friends at a Cloud Guru /Pluralsight and other providers are probably putting together courses as we speak that you can watch entertaining people present and tell you all about it.
I know we're going to do a course, but to be honest, I actually don't know anything about when or who, or because they take a long time, and there's a lot of stuff in these 2 exams. So I would expect that we're trying to get him ready for production, whatever that is, end March or something. But that's a big ask considering we got Christmas coming up as well. But
look, and it's worth remembering that these exams specifically, if you go back to the 2016 or the 2012 certification, there was 3 exams just covering the core on-prem stuff. We've actually cut it down to 2 exams and then added hybrid everywhere. So, and the hybrid's not sitting there as a separate topic. It's sliced in like a bit of pineapple on your hamburger into each one of the functional groups.
How Aussie of you, beetroot. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why we put beetroot on hamburgers either, but apparently that's what it makes them because. Whereas, if there'd been a kangaroo hamburger.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're the rural bloke. For a Danish guy, you sound pretty Aussie.
Yeah, right, mate. It's all right.
Yeah, mate.
Oh, that's awesome. I don't think we had any questions because we haven't been on the air for a while, so there's not many people watching. But this is all recorded as well, so who knows? There might be questions coming after the fact. Feel free to reach out to myself at LastClick on Twitter or at Orin Thomas on Twitter as well, because we kind of live there quite a lot, unfortunately. But
it's on one of these screens at some point in time when I'm working, so I generally will see it.
Yeah, me too. I generally see it as well, reasonably quick. Thanks, Orin. I don't have any other questions because there was a lot of information. Other than I probably have to go and study if I want to. I might try and sit these exams at some point, but not my alley, which is why I want to do it.
Yeah, well, congratulations. You're, again, it's a lot to know, but it's all infrastructure-y stuff, and that's what everything runs on. It doesn't run on, fairy floss and candy canes. It actually runs on infrastructure that's operating systems and cloud stuff.
No, I just use serverless.
Yes, because that makes sure that there's absolutely nothing happening underneath. It's sort of like turtles all the way down, and the turtles are infrastructure.
That's right. All righty. Very good. Thanks, Orin. And we shall see you all later. Bye.
Cool. Have a great one. Bye.